Welcome everyone to today's episode of Timber Talks. We're here at the UK Forest Market Report launch in London at the London Wetland Centre. I'm here today with Harry Stevens and we're going to be talking about the Forest Market Report, and it was all centred around a certain theme this year, and it was Spruce, the potato of trees. Harry, can you talk a little bit about that and what the event was about?
Yeah, so it was really interesting today. I've really enjoyed coming down to the Wetland Centre in southwest London. And yes, spruce is the potato of trees. And we were really drawing the analogy, or I wasn't, colleagues were. Stuart Pearson had the idea of spruce really being very similar to potatoes in as much as it's from North America. We grow it on a monoculture, we take it for granted, and yet it's something we all need. We all need potatoes to eat, and we need spruce for planks of wood in simple terms.
So why is Sitka spruce still seen in such a negative light, even though it's feeding the UK's need for homegrown timber?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and one that almost keeps me awake at night, because it's very frustrating that we as a sector haven't managed to get that message across. But I think it's a victim of its own success, really. We plant it in places where we couldn't really establish many other tree species successfully, and it's the most effective, highest yielding producer that we have in these locations. Easy to establish, grows fast, and produces a high value product at the end of the day. And as a result of that, people probably because it's so common take a dislike to it. But really it's an absolutely fantastic species that underpins the forestry sector.
Very true. And there was a lot of talk today about using wood in architecture. So that's why we've had guest speakers from two different companies. We've got one in Edinburgh as well. We've got Peter and also Robin. And they talked about using more wood and specifically CLT.
Yeah, so we've got several added value products that we've talked about today. CLT, which is Cross Laminated Timber, and essentially what you do is you layer down a load of planks in one orientation, then at 90 degrees you layer down another, put down another layer, and you glue them together. Now you can have up to 7 layers, and you stabilize the timber, and you make it into a much more sort of homogeneous product that you can then cut and shape into different size products, but typically can then use that for prefabricated building sections, so the wall and the ceiling and the floor of a house, which is allowing us to build it or manufacture buildings off site and then bring them in and very quickly put up these buildings that you see that can have multiple layers, 6, 7, 8, and then we're going even higher than that. We also talk about Glulam Beams, which is a similar process, but we use a higher quality product, underlying quality products in there, and we're building up these structural beams that you very often see in swimming pools and in supermarkets and things these days, which is another. It's a more structural form of product that you can use to support the building, and these are both highly added value products that allow us to substitute out of concrete and other building materials into sustainable timber building materials.
And you can get hold of that in the UK, can't you?
You can. It's a growing market. It's a much more established product in mainland Europe. But our parent, binderholz, is very heavily engaged in the manufacture of this, and it's something we're trying to push more and more into the UK market.
And a lot of these architects that are really pushing for sustainability are coming up with designs where they're using timber. But why are they still using timber from abroad and not our homegrown timber?
There's a perception with some architects, and perhaps more importantly specifiers, that homegrown timber isn't suitable for a lot of building applications. That's something that we're working really hard as an industry to overcome, try and change that perception. We are capable of producing timber, a grade called C16, which is suitable for load bearing in houses, in walls, and there's no reason why that couldn't be used. I think a lot of these things are cultural. There's a certain inertia there, and people, because for centuries timber's come from Scandinavia, we're really struggling to overcome that, and that's something we work hard at as a business and indeed as a sector to try and overcome that.
So really, anyone who wants to use timber in the UK should be using it from the UK because we have the standards.
Yes, of course they should.
Yeah?
Yes.
Now let's talk about what is going on in the timber market right now. Are there any further updates since your last update that you've given us?
Yeah, well, useful to talk about it at this time. Perhaps it'll come no surprise to anyone that we are starting to see the economy slowing down, and that's happening both within Britain, UK, but it's also happening across Europe as well. And the result of that is there's not much homes for much of the production that's going, or reduced. There's oversupply of timber from Europe at the moment, and that's finding its way into the British market. Scandinavian timber sets the price level in the market. Traditionally, UK produced material sits somewhere but £10-20 below that, and at the moment that would take us to prices that would be unsustainable in terms of production. The result of that is most sawmills are running well below normal capacity. We as a group are perhaps running at about 90%, but I'm aware that many of our competitors are lower than that, perhaps as low as 50% in some cases. Therefore, there's less demand for saw logs, and therefore prices fall. Now at the same time, growers have elected not to sell, demand and supply. If they don't think they're getting the prices that they want, then they can elect not to sell their material at the moment. But the consequence of what is coming to the market is that prices are lower. The bad news perhaps is that it's very difficult to see the end of this current market situation, and just taking soundings from the building sector, for example, locally, I think there's little reason to think that we're going to see a vast improvement in 2024. However, these things can change very quickly. If we saw some change in international dynamics of timber demand, it might be that we saw more Scandinavian material being sucked perhaps into the North American market, which then could create a reduction of material that comes into UK. At that point, you conceivably could see an increase in price. However, my own view at the moment is it's hard to see over the first 2 quarters of next year. At the same time, the other end of the sector, the small roundwood sector, that's continuing to see reasonable demand. Why is that? Because although they're seeing the same headwinds that we're seeing in the sawn timber side, there's less co-products being produced because sawmills are running slower. And as a buyer of co-products, you're very often looking at a basket of products, and if you've got less sawmill chips or less sawdust coming from sawmills, you might well look to replace that with small roundwood, the top of the tree. So there's still a reasonable market for that material at the moment. But the overall message is one where prices are down and probably likely to remain somewhat lower for certainly the first 2 quarters of next year, and who knows thereafter.